Yeah, well, get another one then. Okay, Jeremy will address you shortly, and we're really grateful that he's found the time to address us today in what we appreciate has been a fairly busy week. After Jeremy has spoken, we want to do a whole conference photo with the show races and the red card posters that you should now have had handed round. We think it's fitting that on this day of the European elections that we show our unity and solidarity to all those standing up against racism. So at the end of Jeremy's speech, the NEC will join the delegates for the photo, and after that we'll return to the conference business. Jeremy has been a great friend to PCS as a founder member of our parliamentary group. He stands with us in all of our disputes, not just in theory, but in practice as well on our picket lines. I'm now going to ask Mark just to say a few words to welcome Jeremy to our conference.
Conference, I'm sure Jeremy will agree that was a fantastic welcome there. I think we have to recognise that we've not always had a good relationship with your predecessors as Labour leaders, and in many a time over the last decade we found ourselves in a difficult place with Gordon Brown and Tony Blair when our union was under great attack with members losing their jobs. So we as a union have been absolutely thrilled since your election in 2015. Not just because, as Fran has said, that you're a founder member of our parliamentary group, but because you always stand on our picket lines. We noticed that you sent us a message of support during our recent pay ballot, something that was thwarted by the Tory anti-union laws, which we're all hoping to see you repeal if and when you win the general election. We're also really pleased with the 2017 manifesto that made significant commitments that would have benefited PCS members. And this week we've had many of your shadow cabinet here talking about social security, taxation, Ministry of Labour, Ministry of Justice and many other things. And what's been great for our delegates is that they've had a real chance to meet and engage with your colleagues so that they could hear from the people who do the work in the front line. But I also, in introducing you to speak, want to say that we've also had some debates where we've really worried about Nigel Farage, Tommy Robinson, the rise of racism, the threat that that has for many of our members in their communities. And we wanted you to know that before you spoke, we'll be having a consultation later this year about how we put into practice the decision we overwhelmingly took last year, which is we recognise it is now in the interests of all PCS members to see you elected as the next Prime Minister at the head of a radical Labour government. So as someone who has personally known you for a long time, who you gave me personal great support when I was waiting for my heart transplant in hospital, it's great pleasure to ask you to address our conference, and we hope the next time you're here, you do it as the next Prime Minister. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and it's absolutely fantastic to be here at your conference. And thank you, Mark, for the introduction you gave us. But can I start, Mark, by extending my hand of solidarity and sympathy to you about the beloved Bluebirds and Cardiff City. They were relegated from the Premier League. But Mark always looks on the bright side. As you know, he's an eternal optimist, and he can't wait to see them beating Swansea next season. Is that all right, Mark? He's not even funny for him. I've known Mark a very long time, and he's always been a fantastic friend and supporter. And what he went through with his heart transplant and heart operation was truly remarkable. The stoicism that he showed when having to literally carry his heart on his hip around with him. And then all the time he's in hospital, we used to speak on the phone, and he was always more concerned about every other patient in the hospital rather than himself. And it was fantastic that he got the treatment he did and made the recovery he has, and he really is a shining example of what our National Health Service does day in, day out. Public service at its very best. And in the 2015 Labour leadership contest, Mark spotted an opportunity, and I remember it like it was yesterday, of people signing up as registered supporters to vote for change. And at this huge People's Assembly rally we held in Parliament Square, I was the only leadership candidate to attend. Mark told the crowd from the stage that if enough people registered, we could make Labour into an anti-austerity party. Well, it turned out that the bulk of the then existing Labour Party members wanted exactly the same thing. But that sense of being the campaign and being part of the wider anti-austerity movement was so important. That support goes two ways. It was John McDonnell who set up the PCS parliamentary group, and we have a long, long history of working together to defend the interests of PCS members. Mark, you and all the other colleagues in the union and friends have made this union a strong and unwavering voice for its members and a force for a more equal and more democratic society. Thank you for what you do, for what all the members of PCS do all the time. I want to congratulate Fran on being elected the new president of the union. Well done, you. And let me take this opportunity to pay tribute to Fran's predecessor, Janice Goodrich. Without Janice, this union wouldn't be what it is today. Along with Mark, she risked everything in 2001 to defend the democracy of the PCS in the courts. And in doing so, she set PCS on the path of being an inclusive and democratic union, which you are today. It's no wonder she was elected president so many times. I'd also like to congratulate John Maloney on his election as Assistant General Secretary, and thank Chris Bohr for his commitment to the union and all that he's done during his time as AGS. Conference, in the Department of Business, Victoria Street in Westminster, there's a food bank. Just think about that, food bank in a government ministry right in the centre of London. PCS members who work there are donating food so that other PCS members working in the same building, but for an outsourced support service company, have enough to eat. This is Tory Britain laid bare. A food bank in a government department. And those same outsourced workers are currently having to strike for the most basic demand, a wage that they can live on. A living wage and a little respect. Isn't that the least they should expect when working in a government department responsible for employment? So let me say this. Those workers should not only be paid a living wage, but those jobs should be brought back in-house, and they will be under a Labour government. I stand in solidarity with PCS members on strike in the Department of Business and those who took strike action in the Foreign Office as well. And I'm proud that members of our shadow cabinet have joined them on the picket line, including Diane Abbott and others who've shown their support. Because this Labour leadership has always stood on the side of workers. We've been there with you on the picket lines, and that's where you'll always find us, because that's what solidarity means. Contrast the attitude of a Conservative government that tried to break this union. They tried to break you by removing facility time so you couldn't operate effectively. And they tried to break you by ending Chekhov to bankrupt the union. But you not only stood your ground, you went on the attack, took the government to court and won. And you achieved that, the rarest of things. A massive payout from the DWP. And that's especially sweet because everyone can now see what PCS members have known for years. The Tories have a problem with civil service unions. Previous Tory governments blacklisted trade unionists in the civil service. Famously, at GCHQ, just as trade unionists were blacklisted in the construction industry. And despite the recent victories for anti-blacklisting campaigners, the government still refuses to hold an inquiry. A Labour government will hold that inquiry into the effects of blacklisting across our economy. As we will inquire into Orgreave and Shrewsbury as well. And we will end the culture of hostility to trade unions in the civil service. That means, to begin with, restoring the facility time and allowing online balloting. This is, after all, the 21st century. The assault on PCS is part of the wider attack on the whole trade union movement. The legal shackling of trade unions has given us stagnant wages and damaged our economy instead of addressing these problems. The Tories chose to lash out at trade unions yet again. So I give you this pledge. Within 100 days of taking office, the next Labour government will repeal the Tories' Trade Union Act. We need to strengthen our trade unions, not weaken them. There's nothing scary about that. A trade union is just working people who've come together to speak with one voice. All we want is to make sure people have more say over their daily lives. It's that simple. It's about democracy. Why should democracy end the moment you walk into your workplace? Why should the place where you spend most of your day sometimes feel more like a dictatorship? Our Labour government will set a new agenda, and we will establish a new Department of Employment to drive it through. You've heard from Laura Pidcock, and you know her commitment to it, and of course Becky Long-Bailey's commitment to it as well. That department will, I'm sure, be staffed by PCS members, and it will ensure that all workers have equal rights from day one at work, whether they're part-time or full-time, temporary or permanent. Every worker is entitled to sick pay, holiday pay, maternity and paternity rights, and protection from unfair dismissal. If they're doing the job, they're entitled to the rights. And we will ban 0 hours contracts. The very least every employee deserves is to have some certainty of the hours they work each week. It breaks my heart when people come to see me at my constituency advice bureau who've had a lot of hours of work in December during the Christmas rush in the retail sector, suddenly get nothing, get in a complete mess with rent and everything else, and end up in danger sometimes of losing their home, and certainly unable to survive through a difficult period. It's simply wrong and unfair. Therefore, we will end this appalling principle of 0 hours contracts. But we'll go further. We're going to roll out sectoral collective bargaining across the economy. And for PCS, that would mean the return of a national collective bargaining. Central, not delegated pay bargaining across the civil service, empowering workers through their trade unions by enabling collective bargaining is not only the best way to strengthen their voice, but will also deal with what is actually grotesque inequality that scars our society. 20% of Britain's wealth, think of that figure, 20%, a fifth of wealth, is now in the hands of just 1% of the population, making us, Britain, United Kingdom, one of the most unequal countries in Europe. Workers need a pay rise. Public sector workers have had years of capped pay. The government should be a model employer, leading by example, not undervaluing its employees, denigrating their union, and trying to divide and rule different public sector workers. We want to raise wages across the board. No one can feel secure on poverty pay. And remember, much of the poverty in Britain is actually in-work poverty. It's people working, sometimes 1 or 2 jobs, and still unable to make ends meet. When you're constantly on the edge, when you're stressed about affording rent and food, you're not really in a position to assert your rights. The stress dominates everything in your life. Think of that for many workers in many industries. So, Labour will introduce a £10 per hour real living wage. For the UK's lowest paid workers, that will mean a pay rise of more than £2,600 a year. That's life-changing. As I announced recently, we will extend the £10 living wage to young workers, including those under 18. In my experience, young people don't get a discount in the shops for being under 18. They don't eat any less, and if my youngsters were anything to go by, they shouldn't be paid any less because they actually eat a lot more than older people, and they need that sense of recognition. Equal pay for equal work should not be a controversial idea. So let's end this discrimination against young workers. As trade unionists, our solidarity with working class people doesn't stop at our borders. So I'm sure you will join me in sending support to workers across the globe. Whether it be the mass walkout of workers at Hyundai heavy industry in Korea, or the 1,000 United Steelworkers members in Canada who've been locked out by their employer, ABI, some of whom from United Steelworkers I met in Parliament yesterday when they were visiting with friends from Unite the Union. Or the workers at Esso in Australia who've just marked their 700th day out on strike against a 40% pay cut. We stand with them and trade unionism around the world, because that is the way in which the working class communities can advance. Yesterday, Professor Philip Alston, a special rapporteur for the United Nations, released his final report on poverty in our country, in Britain. I'm sure some of you have seen it. It's a shocking indictment of the government's policies, which have caused misery to millions. The report states that 14 million people in the United Kingdom are currently in poverty. Think of that figure, 14 million from a UN report. The government should be utterly ashamed. Well, what do we see from them instead? An arrogant and uncaring dismissal of the report, while they waste thousands of pounds on propaganda in the Metro newspaper trying to promote universal credit without even saying it was a DWP advertisement in the first place. Rather than investing in social security or properly paying the staff who administer universal credit, the government is spending money glossing over its own failures and the deficiencies in the system. I recognise that many PCS members are in the very difficult position of having to deliver a policy that goes against their public service values. I meet members of your union all the time in my own community, and I thank you for the work you do, and I do understand the stress levels for those working, particularly in the DWP. But I say to you, you should not be put in that awful position. And I pay tribute to PCS members who are fighting to change the system that is failing so many of the people you meet across the desk every day. We have to change the culture of the DWP to one of helping people, not penalising people. I remember when the old DHSS, Department of Health and Social Security, was required to advise people on what benefits they needed or were entitled to and give them all the support that was available. And I was a member of the parliamentary committee that studied the 1986 Social Security Bill that removed that requirement. Of course, I opposed the removal of that requirement, as I've opposed all the other regressive changes to Social Security since then. What Margaret Thatcher's government was attempting to do was undermine the whole ethos of social solidarity. So we must return to or develop a culture that recognises that people are more than just numbers on a form. They're human beings. But to do that, staff need resources, training, support and time. Job centres, the DWP and all other government departments need to be properly staffed. Nearly 10% of job centres closed between 2015 and 2018 alone. For many, that can mean having to rely on public transport to travel further to a job centre at a time when bus services are being cut and fares are rising, inevitably leading to sanctions when appointments are missed. This is what you get after years of austerity. This is what modern Britain is about for people that are on the edge and up against it. So, Conference, we need to reprogram our whole economy so it works for the many, not the few, as we set out in our 2017 manifesto. The days when governments could get away with sitting back and leaving all the major decisions about our economy and our lives to the mystery of market forces are over. When 5,000 jobs are threatened at British Steel in Scunthorpe and other places, along with 20,000 in the supply chain, the costs of complacency are very clear. That's almost 30,000 people today desperately worried about their future, and communities like Scunthorpe worried about the future of their town. We need a government that's prepared to act, not look for excuses, to invest in every region, nation and community and rebalance our economy away from the City of London, to upgrade our infrastructure, to bring rail, mail and water and the national grid into public ownership. And as I put it to the Prime Minister yesterday at Prime Minister's Question Time, to properly fund our schools, properly fund our hospitals, childcare, transport, housing. And yes, that includes council housing. And we need a government that will crack down on the tax dodgers and introduce a fair taxation system so the rich pay their share through a properly resourced HMRC. And some of the greatest advisors I've had are people who work in the HMRC. Because the country simply cannot afford the cutbacks to HMRC and the closure of offices that we've seen under this government, and the PCS members that have fought so hard to oppose it. If ever there was an example of a false economy, surely this is it. We're proposing nothing less than the radical transformation of our economy and our society. And that means the civil service will have a very big role to play. We will need extra capacity to achieve what is set out in our very ambitious manifesto and programme. Brexit has placed huge demands on the civil service and exposed the extent to which it's been cut to the bone. And it's not only jobs that have been lost, but that vital thing of institutional memory in offices, in workplaces, in Whitehall, that experienced workers bring to what goes on day to day. Brexit has also exposed the dysfunction of the Conservative Party. Mind you, that might have been noticed beforehand. The Prime Minister's authority is shredded. Quite simply, it's time to go. Time up for the Prime Minister. I've seen the demise of 2 Tory Prime Ministers since becoming Leader of the Opposition. I can't wait for a hat-trick. But what is more important is let's give a chance for the people to have a say. Let's have a general election and show these incompetent, cruel and self-interested Tories the door. Ours is the only party that is serious about uniting this country and transforming our economy so that it benefits all communities in all parts of the country, not just a privileged few. We want and will always have a very close relationship with Europe, whatever the outcome of all this process. And I've made reaching out to trade unions, left parties, left of centre parties, and progressive movements all across Europe a very high priority since I became leader of the party. Because I want to live in a continent that we can call a social Europe. And that's the message that we're giving in these European elections. And straight after this, I'll be heading to Worthing to do some campaigning. So when you get home from this conference today, I urge you all to vote. And I hope you'll vote Labour. And if you can give us a hand on the doors, that would be great, even better. Because we believe that the real divide in this country is not between those who voted Leave and Remain, but between the many and the few. Whether you're from Tottenham or Mansfield, Stockwell or Stoke, so many of the problems you face are exactly the same. Austerity, insecure work, and low wages. They cause anger, but they also lead to disillusion. Some want to use that to stoke and encourage further division. But it wasn't the European Union that slashed public services to pay for tax cuts for the richest. It was a Tory government. It wasn't nurses or teachers or civil servants who crashed our economy in 2008. It was bankers and hedge funds. And it wasn't migrants who caused the biggest squeeze on wages since the beginning of the 19th century. It was bad employers. We need solutions, not scapegoats. Mark opened this conference on Tuesday with a call to oppose the growing forces of the far right, and he was absolutely correct to do so. In January, an RMT picket line in Manchester was violently attacked by what we can only describe as a fascist mob. The far right are a threat to women, a threat to minority ethnic communities, and to all workers. We must stand strong in defence of our multicultural, multi-ethnic, multilingual society, which is strengthened, not weakened, by diversity. But we must be prepared to organise in our workplaces and in our neighbourhoods to oppose the far right. Our strength comes from solidarity. from bringing people together and communities together. It's very easy to stoke up division between people. It's very easy to create an atmosphere of hate. We all know that. But at the end of that, you've created this horrible atmosphere, you've created this sense of hate. Have you built a school? Have you trained a nurse? Have you educated a child? Have you built a house? Have you achieved anything? No. It's the arid road to nastiness and nowhere. Only solidarity together can create the decent society that we all want to live in. The conference, the biggest threat that we must tackle together is climate breakdown. PCS has done great work on this within the trade union movement, and I thank you for that. The advanced thinking you've done and the pamphlets you've produced and the research you've done into it. But we need a government that takes the climate crisis equally seriously. A few weeks ago, Labour led the way in Parliament by proposing a motion making our Parliament, the UK Parliament, the first in the world to declare a climate emergency. And I'm very proud of that. It was a good start. What we need now is rapid and dramatic action to prevent an emergency becoming a catastrophe. Because this is no longer about the distant future. We're talking about the irreversible destruction of the environment within our own lifetimes. But here's the crucial point. Meeting this challenge doesn't have to be a burden. Indeed, it isn't a burden. It's a huge opportunity to build a new kind of economy that actually works for all. So we will kickstart a green industrial revolution that will boost our economy and create hundreds of thousands of new jobs in green technology, energy, and protect our environment, as is being proposed in the United States with the Green New Deal that a number of people are putting forward. Climate breakdown is actually a class issue. It's working class communities that suffer the worst effects of air pollution. Our children losing 10% of their lung capacity before the age of 5 because they live alongside some polluting major roads. It's our communities least able to rebuild their lives after flooding and will be hit the hardest by rising food prices. It is up to us to address those issues that deal with inequality and injustice, as well as the threat to all of us through climate change. I am very well aware that to achieve our ambition of a radical redistribution of wealth and power, we cannot do it alone. The success of a future Labour government will depend on the strength of the Labour and trade union movement to elect it and to sustain it in office. So, when Labour comes to power, you come to power too, because the changes we need in our society will not be possible without the involvement of the entire movement. Together, we'll make sure the rich pay their fair share of tax. Together, we will create a social security system that's about support, not sanctions. Together, we will fight racism and fascism and the far right. Together, we will tackle the climate emergency to give our children a future. And together, I think we can build a socialist economy that works for the many, not the few. I'm proud to lead our party, proud of the chance we've got to put that offer to the people of this country, and proud of the people that we're working with day in and day out to ensure that message is delivered. There are those who don't want to hear our message and therefore try to stop it being heard. But there are millions more who are determined to see a different way of doing things, a better world, where the wonders and imagination of our children will be brought to fruition through an education system that works for all, a health service that deals with health inequalities as well as curing people, and ensuring everybody's decently housed. Those, I think you'll agree, are things well worth fighting for. Conference, thank you for inviting me here today.
Jeremy, Jeremy, we thought long and hard about what we could give you as a gift, and and we have visions of your house being full of PCS plates, PCS vases, PCS quakes. So we got you this, which is, well, I don't know what it's called. It's a piece of glass that says, Jeremy Corbyn, long-time friend of PCS. And on behalf of PCS, I'm delighted to present you to this.
Yeah, we do the picture now. Thank you very much. It will go on my desk, and I will see it in front of me every day. Thank you very much indeed.
Got the box.
Yeah, thank you.
OK, conference, should we do the photo opportunities? If the NEC would like to move